Right, so before we start properly, I want to talk about the bell, not what it does in the show, just the object. It's a concierge bell, a little brass dome on a spring, the kind that sits on a hotel front desk so you can summon someone to carry your bags upstairs. It is genuinely one of the least threatening items ever manufactured. And somehow it became the single most frightening sound in modern television. That's the sort of thing we're going to be sitting with tonight. This isn't a ranking and it isn't a recap. What I want to do is walk through the whole life of Hector Salamanca, start to finish, in the right order for once. Because we got it backwards. We met the man at the very end of his life first, sat in a chair, unable to say a word, and then spent the next 13 years having the rest of it filled in around him. If you enjoy this sort of thing, there's a subscribe button somewhere near this video, and it does help. That's the only time I'll mention it. Otherwise, get comfortable. This one's going to take a while. The first time we see him, he's furniture. Season 2, Episode 2 of Breaking Bad, an episode called Grilled. Tuco has dragged Walt and Jesse out to a shack in the desert, and there's an old man sitting in the corner in a wheelchair staring at a television set. He doesn't move. He doesn't blink much. Tuco calls him Tio, feeds him, wheels him about, and otherwise treats him roughly the way you'd treat a piece of heirloom furniture you can't throw out. And Walt and Jesse buy it completely. They stand in that room and openly discuss how they're going to kill Tuco in front of him because they've decided he's not really there. I still find that scene genuinely uncomfortable to watch, and I've seen it more times than is reasonable. Not because of the violence, because there isn't much in that particular stretch. It's the assumption. Two men looking at a person and concluding without much thought that the lights are off. Then the burrito arrives. Walt hasn't cooked up rice and mixed it into the food here. He's simply trying to survive captivity. And the old man in the corner starts ringing that bell. Tuco, who has no idea what's happening, interprets it the way you'd expect. He thinks his uncle wants the bigger portion. So he hands the poisoned plate over, and Hector, without any change of expression at all, knocks it onto the floor and points a finger straight at Walt. That is the whole character in about 4 seconds. He can't speak. He can't move much. He saw everything, understood everything, and did something about it before anyone else in the room had caught up. There's a detail in that shack that people sometimes skip past, and it turns out to matter enormously later. Tuco takes their driving licenses off them and reads the names out loud. Walter White. He reads the address on Walt's license out loud to Hector. Jesse's face is right there in front of him for the better part of a day. None of that is treated as important at the time. It's just Tuco being Tuco, showing off, narrating his own life. But Hector is filing it. All of it. The episode after that is called Bit by a Dead Bee, and it gives us our first proper piece of backstory, delivered so casually you could easily miss it. Hank and Gomez bring Hector into a DEA interview room to see if he can identify Jesse. And to establish that he can communicate, they run him through some simple questions, 1 ring for yes, 2 for no. He answers them all perfectly. Then they ask him about Jesse, and he simply voids his bowels in the chair. I'm not going to pretend that's a sophisticated piece of writing because it isn't. It's a bathroom joke. But it works, and it works because of what Gomez says afterwards. He tells Hank there's no point, that this man did 17 years in San Quentin and never once gave anybody up, and that a stroke doesn't change what somebody is. That's the first real fact we ever learn about Hector Salamanca. Not his name, not his rank, not his family, just that one number and what he did with it. It's thrown away in a corridor as a bit of cop shop shorthand, and it ends up being the foundation stone of everything the prequel builds later. So that's how we met him. As a prop that turned out to be a person, and then as a person who turned out to be the most disciplined man in the building. But if we're doing this properly, we should go back a lot further than that shack. Let's talk about the family. Family is all, that's the phrase. It gets repeated by 3 generations of Salamancas across both shows, usually right before or right after somebody does something appalling, and it always lands as though it's a comfort rather than a threat. let me lay out the family properly because it's easy to lose track. At the top, there's Abuelita, Hector's mother, played by Miriam Colon in Better Call Saul. She's the little old lady in the house where Tuco takes Jimmy in season 1, sitting quietly while horrible things happen a few feet away. Then Hector, then a generation of nephews, and this is where it gets busy. Tuco, Lalo, and the twins, Marco and Leonel, who most of us just call the cousins. And then below all of them, a grandson, Joaquin, who we actually do meet very briefly. Hector raised the nephews. Not fostered, not looked after occasionally, raised. That's the thing the shows keep circling back to. The scene everyone thinks of is in a Breaking Bad episode called 1 Minute, which is season 3, episode 7. It's a flashback to the twins as small boys playing in a yard with toy trucks. One of them breaks the other's toy. Lionel goes crying to his uncle, and Hector does the thing any relative might do, which is tell him it's not the end of the world. Leonel, being about 6, says he wishes his brother were dead, and Hector says, fine, let's do that then. He calls Marco over to a barrel of iced water and holds his head under, and he does not let go until Leonel hits him. He keeps going calmly while Leonel screams and pulls at him until Leonel hits him hard enough across the face to break his grip. Then he sits them both down and tells them that family is all. Blood is blood. The line, everything else is nothing, actually comes from Jerry Kingsley in the 1959 film Middle of the Night. Now, I've heard people describe that scene as Hector teaching a lesson, and I understand why, because that's how the scene presents itself. But I don't think that's quite what's happening. He's not teaching them that family matters. He's teaching them that the only way to protect somebody is to be willing to hurt someone else immediately and without hesitation. Those are two very different lessons, and the second one produces exactly the kind of men the cousins turn out to be. They grow up into two people who will kill anyone, instantly, without discussion, and who are also the only characters in the entire franchise who genuinely love each other without complication. Sort of like how our parents talk about how hard things were back in the day whenever we'd complain about anything growing up. Same instinct, same intention, wildly different execution. Here's a fun detail on that scene. The two boys are played by real brothers, Victor and Ruben Munoz Soto, which mirrors exactly the casting logic used for the adult cousins later on. We'll get to that properly further down because that particular casting story is one of my favorite things about this whole universe. Tuco is the other one worth pausing on. Hector saw Tuco as a son, not a nephew, and he groomed him to take over the family side of the business. That's said out loud in Breaking Bad, in a meeting we'll come to eventually. Which reframes Tuco a bit, I think. Because Tuco, on screen, is a paranoid mess who beats his own men to death over nothing. And that was the succession plan. That was the chosen heir. And here's the thing that sits under this entire section and that I can't really shake. He outlives all of them, every last one. I don't think either show ever says that out loud. It doesn't need to. Since we're on the subject of who Hector actually answered to, let's talk about the organization itself. The cartel in these shows is presented as a kind of horrible family firm. And I mean that structurally rather than emotionally. There's a boss, there are two senior partners, and there's a very clear sense of who's been there longest. The boss is Don Eladio Fuente. Below him, Juan Bolsa and Hector, both capos, both there from the beginning. Hector's version of the founding story comes out much later, screamed across a restaurant, and I'll leave the details of that scene for when we get there. But the gist is that he believes he and his family built the whole thing, Salamanca money, Salamanca blood, and that the rest of them have been living off it ever since. Whether that's accurate or whether it's an old man rewriting history in his favor is genuinely left open, which I appreciate. Nobody ever contradicts him. Nobody ever confirms it either. What we do know is the early business model, and it's less glamorous than you'd think. In the beginning, the cartel weren't producers, they were couriers. Cocaine came up from Colombia and the Mexicans moved it across the border for a cut. That's it. They took the risk, they took the arrests, and they took a fraction of the money because they had no product of their own to sell. That detail is doing an enormous amount of quiet work, and it's why the whole Gus situation eventually becomes so poisonous. The moment somebody arrives with a product they can actually manufacture themselves, the balance of the entire organization shifts. Hector spends decades as the muscle of a middleman operation and then watches a newcomer walk in with something better. Then there's the Hacienda, Eladio's compound in the hills with the pool where roughly 90% of his screen time takes place. Hector paid for that, he says so, and again, nobody disputes it. I love the running joke about that pool, and it is a joke, even if it's never played as one. Eladio essentially never leaves it. There's exactly one moment across both shows where he gets up and walks out to his own driveway to look at a car, and it feels like an event. Senior members of the organization refer to him as our friend by the pool, like he's a feature of the landscape. Everyone else is out in the desert getting shot at. He's in a dressing gown, holding a drink, being extremely rude to people who have driven for 6 hours to see him. The cartel's protection is worth a mention, too. They're described as an outfit with deep connections into the federal police. And there's a line about Bolsa's brother being a senior police chief. That's how the organization actually survives. Not through firepower, through paperwork. And through all of this, Hector holds rank. Even in the chair, years after the stroke, contemporaries still call him Don Hector. That title never goes away. Bolsa uses it. Gus uses it mostly, and there's a rather good story about the one time he doesn't, which I'll save for later on. So that's the shape of the world he's operating in. Old firm, rigid hierarchy, a boss who does nothing, and a man who thinks he's owed considerably more than he's been given. Which brings us to 1989, and the meeting everyone remembers. Heat, chlorine, white linen, and a man in a very good suit standing beside a swimming pool with a drink he hasn't touched. That's the register of the scene. It's shot like a garden party. Nobody raises their voice for most of it. Before we get to what happens there, though, I want to go back a few months because the contempt comes first, and it's important that it comes first. In 1 minute, the same episode with the water barrel, there's a flashback of Hector on the telephone. He's discussing a new arrival, some man up north who's been making approaches to the organization. And the tone is pure sneering. He calls him the chicken man. He says big generalissimo, big fry cook is more like it. And then he gives his verdict, which is that you never trust a South American, and he adds a description of them that I'm not going to repeat because it doesn't need repeating. So by the time Gustavo Fring gets his meeting, Hector has already decided, not about the deal, about the man. He's decided that this person is beneath the room he's standing in. The meeting itself is in an episode called Hermanos, Season 4, Episode 8, and it's one of the best things Breaking Bad ever did. Gus and his partner Max Arcaniega arrived to pitch. They've been running a chemist and a plan and a fried chicken business, and they've done something clever and extremely reckless to get Eladio's attention, which was to hand out free samples of their product to the cartel's own people. From their side, that's a demonstration. From Eladio's side, it's a stranger walking into his house and helping himself. And the negotiation actually seems to be going fine for a while. Eladio is charming, everyone's smiling. Then he starts talking about respect, and the temperature changes without anything visibly happening. Hector is standing right there through all of it. And before that, in the same sequence, we get the moment that tells you exactly what he thinks of everyone present, which is that he walks over and urinates into Eladio's pool. Not Gus's pool, Eladio's, his own boss, in front of everybody. Then he shoots Max in the head at the edge of the water, without warning and without any change in his face. Bolsa holds Gus down on the tiles, so he has to watch. Eladio explains, in the tone of a man giving useful career advice, that Gus is only alive because of who he knows in Chile. And Hector leans over him and delivers the line that powers the next 22 years of the story. Look at him. You did this to him. My advice, stick to chicken. Here's what I find remarkable about the way it's directed. There's very little violence in it. One shot, and it's over almost before you've registered it. The scene isn't interested in the killing, it's interested in the humiliation afterwards, the holding down, the watching, the advice. That's a deliberate choice, and it's the correct one because a murder produces grief and humiliation produces a project. Grief fades, humiliation compounds. Everything Gus does for the rest of his life, the restaurants, the laundry, the super lab, the years of pretending to be a mild man who sponsors police charity events, all of it is downstream of about 90 seconds beside a swimming pool. And Hector, as far as I can tell, gives it almost no thought whatsoever afterwards. That's the asymmetry that makes the whole feud work. One man is building a 20-year plan, the other man has genuinely moved on to other things. And here's a detail I always liked because it's the pettiest possible version of the same rivalry. A bobblehead. That's the object at the center of this one. A little commemorative bobblehead of Don Eladio, presumably commissioned, presumably paid for, definitely carried across a border by a senior cartel figure in a nice car. The episode is Sabrosito, Season 3, Episode 4 of Better Call Saul, and it opens with a flashback to the mid-90s. Hector arrives at the hacienda with his tribute, and you can see in the way he carries himself that he thinks he's about to have a good afternoon. He's brought money, he's brought news, which is that he's expanded into the United States and bought an ice cream business as a front, and he's named the shop after Eladio as a tribute, which is a level of workplace flattery that I find genuinely amazing given who these people are. He presents the bobblehead. Eladio looks at it the way you'd look at a birthday card from a colleague you don't like. Barely a reaction. He picks up on the money briefly and calls the amount cute. Then Bolsa arrives with Gus's tribute, which is enormously larger and describes Gus as a distribution genius. And Eladio, in front of everyone, tells Hector he ought to be paying attention to how the chicken man does things. That's it. That's the whole scene. No violence, nobody threatens anybody. And it is more brutal than most of the actual killings in either show. What gets me about it is that this is one of the only times we ever see Hector genuinely trying to please somebody. Every other version of this man is calculating or contemptuous or perfectly still. Here, he's a middle-aged man who has done his homework, brought a gift, and prepared a presentation, and he's being talked over. It's played as pathetic rather than menacing, and I think that's a very brave choice for a prequel to make about one of its scariest characters. The shop itself is called El Michoacano, and it's not just a piece of flashback set dressing, it becomes his office. Through most of Better Call Saul's third season, that's where he does the daily business of the organization. Dealers come in one by one, drop off their money, and Nacho counts it at a table, while Hector sits opposite with a coffee, which is a lovely bit of visual comedy that the show never draws attention to. The most feared man in the region conducts his affairs surrounded by tubs of ice cream and a hand-painted menu board. There's an ice cream truck operation running out of it too, moving cash south across the border, and that becomes very relevant when a certain former Philadelphia police officer starts paying attention. But the reason I wanted to give this section its own space is the tribute scene, because the whole Gus and Hector feud gets described in fan conversation as this operatic blood vendetta, and it partly is. It's also, at its origin point, a man being embarrassed at a sales meeting. Both things are true at once. The show is completely relaxed about that, and I think it's funnier and sadder for it. Now let's jump forward to the stretch of his life that Better Call Saul spends the most time on. Hector in his prime, running things day to day. Two men in a diner booth, and only one of them was expecting company. Mike Ehrmantraut is sitting, having his coffee, face still swollen, because Call Salamanca has recently beaten him half to death in a car park in a scheme Mike himself engineered. and an elderly man walks in, asks whether the other side of the booth is free, and sits down before he gets an answer. That's Rebecca, Season 2, Episode 5. And it's our first look at Hector on his feet. He's charming in a way. He apologizes for his nephew's behavior. He calls Tuco a hothead, says he thinks he's a boxer, says he should have shown respect. All perfectly pleasant. And then without any change in tone, he explains what Mike is going to do. Mike is going to tell the district attorney that the illegal gun found at the scene was his, not Tuco's, and if the DA asks why he didn't mention it before, he can make up whatever he likes. There's $5,000 in it. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentions that he knows Mike used to be a cop in Philadelphia. They go easy on ex-police. That's the whole man in one conversation. He didn't come to threaten anybody. He came having already done the research, and he let the research do the threatening for him. He leaves without waiting for an answer. Mike says no, obviously, because Mike says no to everything at least once. What follows is a proper escalation, and it's the only time in the script I'll use that word because the show does it very carefully. First, there's a man loitering near Mike's house, which Mike handles. Then 2 men waiting inside, which Mike also handles. Then, in Bali, Hawaii, Mike is at a motel pool playing with his granddaughter, and he looks up, and the cousins are standing on the roof of the next building, and one of them makes a gun shape with his hand and points it at the child. Nobody says anything. Nobody comes down. That's the entire message. And the negotiation that follows is my favorite Hector scene in either show, genuinely. Mike walks into the ice cream shop surrounded by Hector's men and agrees to take the gun charge. Then he says his price is $50,000. Hector tells him that time has passed and there's no $5,000 anymore. Mike says $50,000. Hector suggests that his payment can be that he gets to keep living. Mike says not enough, and Hector asks him quite seriously whether he's willing to die over this. And Mike says maybe he needs the $50,000 more than Hector does. And Hector laughs. He actually laughs. He says something about giant balls and asks how a man with a mouth like that has managed to live so long, and he pays. Which tells you something genuine about him. He respects nerve. Not loyalty, not competence, nerve specifically. It's the one currency he'll accept from an outsider. The rest of that season is Mike quietly dismantling the meth operation. He robs one of the cash trucks, ties the driver up in the desert, and walks off with the money. And that's where we get the coldest thing Hector does anywhere in either show, and it's not on screen, it's reported. A passing motorist finds the driver tied up out there and cuts him loose, but when the driver calls Hector, Hector shows up, shoots the motorist in the face, and has the scene cleaned up. A good Samaritan, in the most literal sense. And Hector has him killed, not because he was involved, because he was there. Mike hears about it secondhand, and it lands on him like a weight, because he caused it. It's also the moment he decides to remove Hector permanently, which nearly happens. In Click, Mike sets up on a hilltop with a rifle, waiting for Hector to come out of a desert shack. And he has the shot, and Nacho keeps drifting into the frame in front of him, and Mike won't take a chance on hitting the wrong man. Then a car horn starts blaring somewhere down the road, and it turns out to be his own car, with a branch wedged against the horn and a note on the windscreen with one word on it. Don't. That's a whole other story and not tonight's. But the point stands. Hector spends an entire season being hunted by the most methodical man in New Mexico and survives it without ever knowing it happened. And speaking of Nacho standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, his story with Hector is one of the best things either show ever did. A single capsule on a tiled floor. That's where it starts. Not with a plan, not with a decision, just a small orange and white capsule rolling under a table while an old man is having a coughing fit. To get there, though, we need the situation. By season 3 of Better Call Saul, Hector's smuggling routes have collapsed. The ice cream operation is finished, a truck has been intercepted at the border, the DEA has been through the shop. He has product and no way to move it. So he does the most Hector thing imaginable. He walks into Los Pollos Hermanos in the middle of a weekday lunch service with his men and sits down among the customers. Gus arrives, and there's a conversation in the back, which is the closest these two ever come to negotiating as equals. Gus explains very reasonably that his trucks are full, that his staff are civilians, that Hector has endangered a legitimate business. And Hector gives him the line that people have been quoting ever since, which is that he is the cartel and that Gus is now his mule and will be carrying Salamanca product north. He's not wrong about his rank, he's completely wrong about the room. Then comes off-brand. Arturo brings news from the prison. Tuco has stabbed another inmate and broken a guard's jaw, and he's going into solitary. 6 months has become years, and Hector loses it. Properly loses it, shouting, and it triggers his heart condition. He's had angina for years, he carries capsules for it, and in the middle of the coughing fit, the bottle goes everywhere. He scrabbles them up off the floor. Nacho watches him do it, and Nacho notices one left behind. Now, Nacho's motive here matters because it isn't ambition. Hector has decided to use Manuel Varga's upholstery shop as a new front for moving product across the border. That's Nacho's father, an honest man, a legitimate business, and a person who has never done anything to anybody. Nacho objects, and Hector waves it away and says he'll take care of the old man, give him enough money that he never has to work again. He genuinely cannot conceive of a person who would say no to that. So Nacho gets hold of a batch of empty capsules from Daniel Wormald, fills them with ibuprofen, and starts waiting for an opportunity. The swap itself, in an episode called Slip, is one of the most nerve-shredding sequences in the entire franchise, and it happens at a table in an ice cream parlor in the middle of the afternoon. Nacho has sabotaged the air conditioning the night before, so the place is baking, which means Hector's jacket is draped over the back of his chair rather than on him. The dealers come in one at a time. Nacho counts money. Then he holds up one of Crazy 8's notes and says, "It looks funny." And Hector, who cannot resist an opportunity to check somebody else's work, calls him over to look at it. While Hector is squinting at a dollar bill, Nacho leans across and lifts the pill bottle out of the jacket pocket. Then he drops the rest of the money on the floor so that the noise and the mess cover him sitting back down. He keeps the bottle in his lap under the table, counting the next dealer's cash with one hand while he swaps the capsules with the other. And then he goes to fetch more coffee, and on the way past he drops the bottle back in. It takes about 4 minutes of screen time, and I don't think anybody breathes through any of it. And then nothing happens. That's the part I'd forgotten until a rewatch. The pills sit in his pocket for weeks. He has an attack at a meeting in the desert and takes one, and they seem to have no effect because of course he does, they're ibuprofen. Nacho watches this and quietly panics because as far as he can tell, his plan has failed and his father is now on a timetable. The end comes in Lantern, the season finale. There's a meeting at Hector's warehouse. Bolsa is there to deliver Eladio's decision, which is that Gus's distribution network will now be used exclusively. Hector's roots aren't coming back, and Hector goes off like a firework. He tells Bolsa the boss can suck me. He asks who Bolsa thinks he is. He says that he and his family built this whole business, and when Bolsa says they all built it together, Hector shouts that no, Salamanca did, Salamanca money, Salamanca blood. He paid for that hacienda, and they treat them like dogs. Bolsa tells him it isn't personal, and Hector screams that it is. It is personal. Those are the last words Hector Salamanca ever speaks. He goes down mid-sentence, reaching for the pills that aren't pills. Nacho is standing in the shadows at the back of the warehouse, having come there that night to shoot him, watching it happen without having to do anything at all. And Gus, who has been standing 3 feet away for the whole argument, drops to his knees and performs CPR. That's the bit. That's the whole thing, really. Gus Fring spends 20 years planning to destroy this man. And when the man drops dead on a warehouse floor of natural causes, Gus breathes air back into his lungs, which is the part of the story I find most genuinely unpleasant, and I mean that as a compliment to the writing. Let me tell you about a tree. There's a scene in season 4 of Better Call Saul, an episode called Piñata, where Gus sits at a hospital bedside and talks to an unconscious man for about 4 minutes. And it's one of the finest pieces of writing in either series. He talks about growing up poor, in the hills, in a house his brothers built out of metal sheeting and plywood that smelled like hay when it rained, and about a locuma tree that had never borne fruit and that everyone had given up on. He was 7, and he became obsessed with it, watered it, tended it, waited. And eventually there was fruit, and he ate one behind the shack, and it tasted like caramel, and he'd never had anything so sweet. Then something started eating the fruit. A Cody, which he describes as roughly the size of a large house cat. Opportunists. So he built a snare, and the animal got caught and thrashed so hard it broke free, and broke its own leg doing it, and dragged itself under the house. And Gus waited for hours. Into the night, not answering when his brothers called for him, not making a sound, until it came out because it was hungry and he caught it. And he says the merciful thing would have been to kill it. He kept it. It lived for quite some time. Then he says to the unconscious man in the bed that he believes Hector will wake up. I don't think I need to explain that scene. Nobody does. But what I do want to point out is what it actually results in, because this is the bit that people sometimes miss, and it's colder than the metaphor. Gus pays for a specialist to fly in from Johns Hopkins. Not a bribe, not a threat, an actual leading physician brought in at real expense to give Hector Salamanca the best stroke rehabilitation available anywhere. And it works. Over months, Hector starts to come back. He learns to communicate by tapping a finger, which is the direct ancestor of what he does with the bell later. He regains awareness. He regains personality, and we know he regains personality because in one therapy session, he deliberately knocks a cup of water off a tray so that a nurse has to bend over and clean it up. And then he watches her do it. He's still in there, completely, and then the doctor reviews the tapes and tells Gus with genuine enthusiasm that with time, this patient could learn to speak again, possibly even to walk. And Gus says that they should temper their expectations. That's the sentence. That's the moment Hector's entire remaining life is decided, and it's delivered quietly in a corridor by a man being polite. The treatment stops. The specialist goes home. Hector gets transferred to a nursing home called Casa Tranquila, where he will sit for the next 4 years. He is conscious, he is intelligent, he understands everything that is said around him, and he can do nothing. Gus explains it out loud exactly once, much later, to somebody else entirely, kept him alive, kept him broken, saving him for last. The horrible elegance of it is that nobody in the organization ever suspects a thing, because on paper, Gus is the only person who did anything for the man. He performed the CPR. He paid for the doctor. Anyone looking at the record would say Gus Fring went above and beyond for a rival, which is very much the point. And that brings us finally to the bell. The episode is called Wiedersehen, Season 4, Episode 9, written by Jennifer Hutchison. Lalo Salamanca turns up at Casa Tranquila, sits down next to his uncle, and starts telling him a story about the old days, the way you might reminisce with a relative about a holiday. The story is about a hotel in Mexico. The owner had been disrespectful, so they went there and dealt with him. And Lalo remembers admiringly that Hector took his time about it while the man's wife listened from the next room. Then they burned the building down. And Lalo says that while it was still burning, he went back inside for a souvenir. And he's kept it all these years. It's the bell from the front desk. He ties it to the armrest of the wheelchair, positions Hector's hand, and waits. And Hector rings it for the first time. Now, I've seen a fair few people argue that this scene shouldn't exist. The argument is that we didn't need an origin for the bell, that it could just as easily have been a nurse's idea, that giving it a backstory turns a great piece of character shorthand into fan service. And I understand that argument. Prequels do have a habit of explaining things that were better left alone. I don't agree with it though, and here's why. The bell isn't primarily a communication device. That's what it does, but it isn't what it's for. Hector could tap a finger already. He'd been doing that in therapy for months, and everyone around him understood it fine. What the bell gives him is volume. It's an object that makes a noise other people have to respond to. It summons. Its entire design purpose in the world is to make a person walk across a room because you want them to. For a man who has spent his whole life being obeyed and now cannot so much as turn his own head, that isn't a convenience. That's the return of the only thing he actually values. And the fact that it came out of a burning building, taken as a trophy from a man they'd tortured, is exactly the sort of gift this family gives each other. So no, I don't think it was overkill. I think it's the single best character gift in the whole franchise. And Lalo understood his uncle better than anyone else alive. There's a production side to this too. The bell became one of the most recognizable props in television, to the point where it stopped being a prop. When it went to auction in October of 2013, it sold for $26,750, which for a small brass object that cost a few pounds new strikes me as reasonable value for the notoriety. And the sound design deserves a mention because that ring is engineered. It's mixed dry and close and slightly too loud for the room it's in, so it always sits on top of everything else in the scene. Music underneath, dialogue underneath, and then this bright little metallic ping cutting straight through the middle of it. There's no ambiguity to it either. It's not a moody sound, it's cheerful, which is precisely why it works and why a lot of people can't hear a service bell in an actual hotel without a small involuntary reaction. No notes, honestly, it's perfect. Now let's talk about Lalo properly, because the last years of Hector's life are really the Lalo years. Lalo Salamanca is the only person in either show who treats Hector like a human being. That sounds like a compliment, and it partly is. It's also the reason a great many people end up dead. But it's true, and it's worth sitting with, because everyone else in Hector's life relates to him as a rank, an obstacle, a burden, or a target. Nacho manages him. Gus curates him. The nursing staff process him. The cousins revere him, but they revere him the way you'd revere a monument. Lalo just likes him. He was mentioned exactly once in Breaking Bad by Saul Goodman in a panicked line in the desert about how it wasn't him, it was Ignacio, and maybe Lalo sent him. One name dropped in season 2, and then nothing for a decade until Better Call Saul picked it up and built one of its best characters out of it. The first proper Lalo and Hector scene after the bell is in an episode called 50% Off. It's a nursing home visit. An elder care worker comes past and reminds Lalo to keep his uncle hydrated and hands over one of those little cartons of fruit drink. Very berry flavor. And Lalo takes it, tips some of it out, and tops it up from a hip flask. Then he tastes it, considers, and adds a bit more. It's about 15 seconds long. There's no music. Nothing happens. And I think it's the warmest scene in the entire franchise, which says something fairly bleak about the franchise. But there we are. In a building full of professionals whose job is to keep this man safe and comfortable, one person has worked out that he'd probably rather have a drink. The next one is heavier. Bad Choice Road near the end of season 5. Lalo is about to run for Mexico, and he stops in to explain the situation. He tells Hector he'll have Eladio's ear down there, that he can turn the boss against the chicken man from the inside. He reminds him that Tuco is out in 11 months and can take over then. And he says it again, family is everything. Then he leaves and the camera stays on Hector, who has been wheeled into the day room for another resident's birthday party. Balloons, paper hats, a cake, a group of very old people singing. And Hector sitting in the middle of it with an expression I can only describe as somebody being buried alive very slowly at a children's party. Season 6 is where his last real moves happen, and they're all telephone calls, which is a genuinely strange thing to say about a man who can't speak. The setup. Lalo has been attacked at his compound in Mexico by mercenaries and is presumed dead. Everyone believes it. There's a body and it matches his dental records because Lalo is extremely thorough. And then Hector gets a call, and it's his nephew, alive. Lalo tells him it was Fring. Hector, using the bell, objects and asks for proof, which I think is the last genuinely sharp piece of thinking he does. He knows that in this organization, an accusation without evidence is worse than silence. Lalo realizes he knows where to find that proof and hangs up. Then comes the visit. Gus and Bolsa arrive at Casa Tranquila to pay their respects. Gus, who has orchestrated all of it, offers condolences on the death of the nephew. He's perfectly civil. He even admits that he and Lalo never got along, which is a nice touch, because a man pretending would claim otherwise. And Hector, who has spent 22 years refusing to look Gus Fring in the eye as an act of pure spite, shakes his hand and looks up at him. He does it because he's enjoying himself. He's sitting on a secret, and he wants to feel it. And Gus, who has been waiting decades for that look, gets it at the exact wrong moment and understands immediately what it means. That is the single costliest thing Hector ever does. And he does it because he couldn't resist a bit of gloating. There's something almost affectionate in how the show handles it. The old man's pride was always going to be the thing. Then there's the desert shack in Rock and Hard Place. And this is where the Nacho story finally closes. Nacho has been caught. He's on his knees, surrounded, being asked who paid for the attack on Lalo. He gives them a story about the Alvarez family, which is the story Gus needs him to give. Hector rings for Walter White's name. He knows. He's been saying it for years, and nobody has ever listened to him about anything. And Nacho, who has decided how this ends and has negotiated for his father's safety in exchange, stops lying, not about Gus, about everything else. He tells them all what he thinks of them. And then he turns to Hector and says that he was the one who put him in that chair, that he switched the heart medication for sugar pills, that Hector was dead and buried, and he had to stand there and watch Gus bring him back. And that from now on, every night, sitting in a nursing home with a bowl of jelly, Hector can think about him. Then he takes Bolsa hostage, gets hold of a gun, and kills himself in front of all of them. And when it's over, Hector has the cousins carry him across to the body, takes a pistol out of one of their hands, and empties it into a corpse. That's grief, that scene, whatever else it is. It's a man who has just learned that 4 years of his life were taken by somebody he never even suspected. And the only response available to him is to shoot something that can't feel it. The last piece is fun and games, and it's his final scene chronologically before Breaking Bad picks up. Lalo has gone quiet, Hector works out what that means, and he does the only thing left, which is to have the cousins drive him into Mexico to see Don Eladio in person. He can't speak, so he dictates, letter by letter, to Marco and Leonel, and then Bolsa reads it out by the pool. And it's a good letter. It's clear, it's precise, it lays out the sequence. Lalo survived the attack. Lalo called him. Fring sent the mercenaries, not the Peruvians. They kept the survival secret. Lalo went to take his revenge face to face and then disappeared. It is the chicken man's doing. Look into his eyes and you'll see it. And then, at the end, the request. Blood for blood. And Eladio doesn't believe a word of it. Why would he? There's a body with the right dental records. The cousins never heard those phone calls, so nobody can corroborate them. What Eladio sees is a crippled old man with a decades-long grudge making an accusation he can't support about the most profitable associate the organization has. So he refuses. And then he mocks him for the chair and has the cousins take him away. Every single thing in that letter is true. That's what I keep coming back to. Hector is right about Gus in 1989, right about him in the 90s, right about him in the warehouse, and completely right in that letter. He is the only person in the entire cartel who correctly identifies the threat from the very first phone call, and not one person ever believes him, because he's unpleasant, and because being right is not the same as being credible. So that's where Better Call Saul leaves him, wheeled out of a garden party by his nephews with nothing. which puts us right back where we started, except now the chair means something rather different. There's a cupboard in a nursing home day room with board games in it. Scrabble, drafts, the usual, and a Ouija board. That's how the cousins communicate with their uncle in Breaking Bad, and the first time we see it, in an episode called Caballo Sin Nombre, it's presented completely without comment. They come in, they know the routine, they fetch the board, they set it up on his lap. And Hector rings out a name, one letter at a time, with a bell that we didn't know the origin of at the time and that we absolutely understand now. Walterwhite. Which is the payoff for that scene in the shack years earlier, where Tuco read the names off 2 driving licenses to an old man everybody assumed was empty. The cousins get in a car and drive to Walt's house. They walk up the path with an axe, and they're called off at the last possible second by a text message with a single word on it, Paulos. There's a meeting after that in an episode called IFT, and it's a proper look at how the organization actually functions. Bolsa mediates in a room with Gus on one side and Hector and the twins on the other, and he's visibly uncomfortable the entire time. He explains the family's position formally for the record. Don Hector saw Tuco as a son. He groomed him to take his place. Walt's betrayal has earned a death sentence, sanctioned by the family and by the cartel. And Hector confirms it with a single ring. One, clean, deliberate, the punctuation at the end of a sentence somebody else spoke for him. Then Gus says he needs Walt alive for the time being, and the room fills with furious ringing. 2 rings for no, remember? This is considerably more than 2. What happens next has been arranged so far in advance that it's difficult to appreciate on a first watch. Gus steers the cousins away from Walt and toward Hank Schreider, which is a monstrously stupid target, and everyone knows it because killing a DEA agent brings the whole federal government down on everybody. Then he anonymously telephones Hank and gives him a 1-minute warning. Marco dies in that car park. Lionel is taken to hospital in a serious condition and is quietly killed there on Gus's instruction. The same night, a police raid hits a Bolsa's mansion and Bolsa dies in the confusion. And that raid was also arranged by Gus. In one evening, using nobody but the DEA and the Mexican Federal Police, Gus removes both of Hector's nephews and the man who mediated between them. None of which Hector knows until Gus tells him. The nursing home visits in Hermanos are quietly among the nastiest scenes in television. Gus comes in, sits down, and describes what happened. He explains that the cousins are dead and that he arranged it. He explains that Bolsa is dead. He explains that the heat generated by 2 men attacking a federal agent has made it impossible for the cartel to touch his business. And then he says, "Look at me, Hector," and Hector won't. That refusal is the last thing this man owns. It's not defiance in any useful sense. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't cost Gus anything. It's just the one act still available to him, so he performs it every single time. And Gus leaves saying maybe next time. Then there's Crawl Space, which is the visit after Salud, after Gus has gone to Mexico and poisoned the entire senior leadership of the cartel at a party by the pool. He brings Jesse Pinkman with him, and he recites the names Don Eladio, Don Paco, Cesar, Reynaldo, Artuno, Cisco, and Luis Escalara, all dead. And then Joaquin, Hector's grandson, shot by the young man standing in the doorway during the escape. He points out, in case it hasn't landed, that Joaquin was the only family Hector had left, that the family name ends here, in this room, with him. And he takes out Don Eladio's amulet, the gold necklace, and dangles it in front of the old man's face. "Look at me now. Will you look at me now?" And Hector won't, so Gus tucks the necklace into his shirt pocket and leaves it there and walks out. Which brings us to Walter White, who works all of this out from about 3 conversations and 1 very good instinct. Walt is out of options and needs Gus dead. Through Saul and Jesse, he learns that there's a personal history there, that Gus has been visiting an old man in a nursing home for years, and that whatever's going on between them isn't business. So he goes and sits with Hector and makes his pitch, and it's short. He knows Hector despises him. He knows Hector would like to see him dead. But he's willing to bet there's a man out there Hector hates more, and he's offering an opportunity for revenge. That's it. No pressure, no threats. Walt just correctly identifies what this man wants more than anything on Earth and offers it. The plan is beautifully simple and almost entirely made of other people's assumptions. Hector calls a nurse and demands to speak to the DEA, specifically to Hank Schreider. He gets taken to the field office, where every senior agent in Albuquerque assembles to hear what a cartel don has come in to say. And he says nothing useful whatsoever. He spells out insults on a letterboard with the help of his nurse, watches Hank's face, and gets wheeled back out again. That's the whole operation. The point was never the meeting. The point was that the meeting happened at all because Gus is under DEA surveillance and Gus will hear about it, and Gus, being who he is, will conclude that a lifelong enemy has finally started talking to federal agents, which is the one thing that will make a famously cautious man come somewhere in person. He sends Tyrus first to a cop who sweeps the room properly and finds nothing because the device is a simple, non-transmitting circuit that his sweep cannot detect. Tyrus offers to handle it himself, and Gus says no. 22 years is a long time to wait to do something yourself. He comes in, he stands over the chair, and he tells Hector what he is, a crippled little rat who talks to the DEA. He asks whether that's really the reputation he wants to leave behind. He readies the injection, and then he offers it one final time. Last chance to look at me, Hector. And Hector looks up. I want to be careful about how I describe what happens on that face, because it's the whole performance in about 2 seconds, and it's not dramatic, it's very small. There's fear in it first, which is the bait. Then the fear goes, and what's underneath it is delight. And he starts ringing the bell. Gus registers the change before he registers the sound. Then he realizes what is happening as Hector's bell triggers the device under the chair, and he turns for the door, and there isn't remotely enough time. What I find quietly satisfying about the ending isn't the explosion, it's the logic of it. This is a man who spent his final years with exactly one thing left to withhold, and he protected it obsessively, refusing over and over in circumstances where a lesser person would have given in just to make the visit stop. And in the end, he wins by giving it up. He hands over the one thing he'd been keeping back, freely, and it kills the man who wanted it. I don't think either character would describe that as a fair trade, but both of them got precisely what they'd been asking for, which is about as close to justice as this universe ever gets. But I want to spend a good while now on the man who actually did all of that with his face, because he's earned it. Mark Margolis was born in Philadelphia in 1939, which happens to be the same year the character was born. That's a coincidence, and I know it's a coincidence, but it's a nice one, and I'm having it. He moved to New York as a young man and studied under Stella Adler, which, if you don't follow acting history, is roughly the equivalent of having trained under one of the 2 or 3 people who defined how modern screen performance works. And he didn't just study with her, he worked as her personal assistant. Then came about 35 years of being a working actor, which mostly meant the New York stage, dozens of off-Broadway productions, including at the Public Theater. He founded a touring theater troupe called Blue Dome. He was in a Broadway show in 1962, a modern dress version of Julius Caesar relocated to Cuba called Infidel Caesar, and it closed after its first preview. Think about that for a second, a show closing after one preview performance. That's the job. That's what the majority of an acting career actually looks like for the majority of people who have one. The film work built up steadily. Alberto the Shadow in Scarface in 1983, which we'll come back to in a minute because it produces one of my favorite bits of trivia in this entire universe. Mr. Chickadance, the gravelly landlord chasing the rent in Ace Ventura. Antonio Napa on Oz for 5 years. Hannibal, Gone Baby Gone, The Thomas Crown Affair, American Horror Story. And 6 films with Darren Aronofsky, which is a proper working relationship rather than a coincidence. P, Requiem for a Dream, The Wrestler, Black Swan, and Noah. So by the time Breaking Bad came calling in 2009, this was a man with a very long CV who was extremely used to being the person in the scene whose name you don't quite know. And here's how he got the part, which he told on the Better Call Saul Insider podcast years later. It was offered to somebody else first. A friend of his, a Los Angeles actor who looked at the pages, saw that the character had no dialogue at all and turned it down on that basis. Margolis described it as the difference between a Hollywood mentality and a New York mentality. His friend saw no lines and thought there was nothing there. Margolis saw the same pages and thought it was the best offer he had had in years. His words, more or less, were that he didn't have to learn anything, he just had to think. Fly out to New Mexico, get into the scene, and think. He called it heaven. He also had a rather good theory about why the character worked without speech, which I've thought about a lot since. He said you only use words to get what you want. If you've already got what you want, you don't need them. And that's precisely right, isn't it? Hector in that chair has no ambitions left that words could serve. Everything he wants is either impossible or requires other people to act. So the silence isn't a limitation on the character, it's a description of his position. The performance itself was based on somebody real, his mother-in-law, Shirley, who spent years in a nursing home in Florida after a stroke. He was quite open about that, and about how much of what he did came from having sat in rooms like the ones Hector sits in, which reframes the whole thing, I think. It's very easy to describe that performance as scary, and it is. But it's built out of watching somebody he actually knew, and I suspect that's why it never tips into caricature. The frustration is real frustration. The stillness is real stillness. He was nominated for an Emmy in 2012, Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series, for a role that involved almost no words and almost no movement. He didn't win. He should have. One more thing about him that I love, and it's the sort of detail that makes you appreciate the whole enterprise more. Mark Margolis didn't speak Spanish at all. He played one of the most convincing Mexican cartel patriarchs in television history without the language, and got there on physicality and instinct and a great deal of experience. And now the Scarface thing, which is genuinely one of my favorite pieces of trivia in either show. Margolis played Alberto the Shadow in Scarface. Stephen Bauer, who plays Don Eladio, played Manny Ribera in the same film. So when Hector Salamanca urinates in that swimming pool and shoots a man in the head while Don Eladio watches, what you are actually looking at is two Scarface alumni facing each other across a pool in a scene set in 1989, 6 years after that film came out. Nobody in the show ever draws attention to it. It's just sitting there quietly for anyone who notices. He kept working right to the end. He was in Your Honor with Bryan Cranston not long before he died, and Cranston made a point afterwards of saying that he was fun and engaging off set and completely terrifying on it, which is about the highest compliment one actor can pay another. He died on the 3rd of August, 2023 at Mount Sinai in New York after a short illness. He was 83. His wife Jacqueline, who he'd been married to for 61 years, and his son Morgan were with him. Bob Odenkirk called him a powerful screen presence. The official Breaking Bad account said that with his eyes, a bell, and very few words, he turned Hector Salamanca into one of the most unforgettable characters in the history of television. I don't have anything to add to that. It's exactly right. And since we've been talking about people bringing very little dialogue to life, the cousins belong in this conversation too. Here's a casting story that I think about probably more than is normal. In 2009, the Breaking Bad production put out a call for 2 silent hitmen, twins, almost no dialogue, and 2 brothers went in together to audition. Luis Moncada had already been acting a bit. Not much and not in anything good, mostly what he cheerfully describes as gangbanger and cold-eyed killer parts. Because he has, in his own words, tattoos and a bald head and a history. A director had approached him on the street once and asked if he fancied being in a film, and that was more or less how it started. His younger brother Danny had never been in front of a camera in his life. He wasn't even in the union. They went in anyway, performed 2 scenes, did an improvisation in Spanish, and left. 2 days later, they had the parts. 2 weeks after that, they were in New Mexico shooting. They're not twins, by the way. Luis is about 3 years older, born in Honduras, raised in California by a single mother. And they're not remotely similar people either, which is the bit I find funny given how identical they appear on screen. Luis has said that the suits did most of the work and that off-camera, Danny is the more sociable of the two while he's a homebody. Luis has been very open about his past, including a prison sentence for driving a stolen vehicle, and about the tattoos, including the ones on his eyelids, which he got at 18 out of pure teenage anger. There's a story about Bryan Cranston asking him whether the eyelid tattoos hurt, and Luis explaining that the needle wasn't the problem. The problem was the spoon they press underneath the eyelid to do it. He does motivational speaking now in schools and youth prison camps, which is a good outcome for a person and worth mentioning in a video about a fictional crime family. Between the two of them, across the whole of Breaking Bad, the cousins speak 2 words of English: vests. They work, that's it. That's the entire English vocabulary of 2 of the most memorable characters in the series. There's a lovely bit of craft around them too. The director of photography, Michael Slovis, made a deliberate choice to grade all their season 3 exterior scenes with a heavy yellow-brown wash, so that the moment you cut to them, the picture itself changes temperature. You register it before you consciously notice it, which is why they always feel like they have arrived from somewhere else. And when they blow up the truck at the border crossing, that's a real truck, blown up practically on a set with actors nearby. 1 take. They used a lens trick to make the vehicle look considerably closer to the brothers than it actually was, because there was no version of doing that twice. Raymond Cruz deserves a mention as well, because Tuco is a very difficult performance to get right, and he absolutely does. The character has to be genuinely frightening and genuinely ridiculous at the same time, and those 2 things usually cancel each other out. Cruz has said he found the role physically exhausting and didn't especially enjoy the headspace, which I completely believe watching it. Tony Dalton's Lalo is the opposite problem solved beautifully. A charming man, a funny man, someone you'd want at a dinner party, who is also the single most dangerous person in either series. The trick with Lalo is that the charm isn't a mask over the menace. It's the same thing. He's enjoying himself in both modes equally. Michael Mando's Nacho is, for my money, the most underrated performance in the whole franchise. He spends about 4 seasons acting almost entirely with his eyes while standing behind somebody else in the frame, which is a horrible acting job, and he makes it look like nothing. Javier Grajera's Juan Bolsa is a small marvel of a supporting turn, a middle manager. Genuinely, that's what he plays. A tired administrator trying to get 2 departments to stop fighting so the quarterly figures work, who happens to work in a business where disagreements are resolved with firearms. And Giancarlo Esposito, I'm going to say almost nothing about, because Gus deserves his own evening, and I'd like to give him one. Now, a question I get asked a lot about all of this, and the answer is more interesting than a simple yes or no. People want to know which real person Hector Salamanca is based on. And the honest answer is that there isn't one. And the reasons why there isn't one are worth going into properly. Start with the organization. The cartel in these shows is generally understood as a fictionalized version of the Juarez cartel, which was a real and extremely powerful trafficking organization operating out of Ciudad Juarez, directly across the border from El Paso and a reasonable drive from Albuquerque. Geographically, it's the obvious fit for a story about product moving north into New Mexico. Its best-known leader was Amado Carrillo Fuentes, who took control after having his predecessor killed and who ran the organization through the first half of the 90s. He was nicknamed the Lord of the Skies because his innovation was moving product by aircraft, at scale using a fleet of jets. He died in 1997 in Mexico City during plastic surgery intended to change his appearance. Whether that was a medical accident or something arranged has never been established. What is on record is that several months later, the surgeons who operated on him were found dead. After that, his brother Vicente took over, and the organization eventually ended up in a long and enormously destructive war with the Sinaloa cartel. Now, none of that maps onto Hector Salamanca. You can find loose resonances if you want them. The Salamanca surname corresponds to a real Mexican city over in Guanajuato. Michoacán comes up repeatedly in the text of the shows themselves. The ice cream front is called El Michoacano, the factory is located in Albuquerque, and Lalo has a line about his uncle being the boldest man anywhere in Michoacán. So the writers clearly had a mental geography for this family. But that's set dressing and flavor, not sourcing. And I want to be straightforward about this rather than dress speculation up as research, because a lot of content about this topic does exactly that, and it irritates me. Here's the actual difficulty. Reliable, detailed, verifiable biographical information on senior figures in organizations like this is thin on the ground for obvious reasons. What exists in large quantities is rumor, folklore, legal filings that only cover the parts that reached a courtroom, and a very substantial industry of books and documentaries that recycle each other. So when somebody tells you a fictional character is based on a specific real trafficker, they are usually working from the same handful of widely repeated stories that everybody else is working from. There's a timeline problem too, and it's a good one. The Hermanos flashback is explicitly set in 1989. In 1989, the landscape in Mexico looked nothing like the one the show depicts. The Guadalajara organization had only just fractured. The modern cartel structure the shows draw on was years away from existing. And the Colombian supply relationship the show describes was arranged rather differently in practice, which tells you the writers were not attempting a historical reconstruction. They were building an internally consistent criminal world with the right texture and drawing on real practices rather than real people. And the practices are real, broadly. The tribute system, where regional operators bring money to a boss in person and get judged on the size of the pile, that's real. The use of legitimate businesses as fronts and as laundering vehicles, real. The reliance on corrupt police contacts at command level rather than on street muscle, extremely real. The family-based structure where the organizational unit is a bloodline rather than a corporation, real and quite specific to the region. So the show is accurate about how and invented about who, which is the correct way round for a drama, I think. One more thing worth saying since we're here. There's a whole genre of video and article that treats fictional cartel characters as though they're documentaries, and I don't much like it. Partly because it's inaccurate, and partly because the real version of all this isn't entertaining. Hector Salamanca is a superb piece of writing and a superb piece of acting. He is not a window into anything. What he is a very old and very specific idea rendered extremely well. The patriarch whose code destroys the people, the code was meant to protect. That's not Mexican, it's not modern, and it's not criminal. That's Greek. You could stage the plot of this man's life in a toga and change almost nothing, which brings me neatly to a small thing about his name, and then we'll do the odds and ends. Right, let's do the small stuff. This is the part where I just tell you things I like. His name means holder, or holding fast, sort of. The Greek name Hector is generally traced to a root, meaning to hold or to hold fast, and by extension to restrain or check. Which, for a character who spends the overwhelming majority of his screen time physically unable to move, is either a very good joke or a very good accident. I genuinely don't know which, and I've never seen anyone from the production claim it either way. He appears in around 30 episodes across the two shows combined, which makes him the most televised member of the Salamanca family by a comfortable margin. Before the chair, he drove a 1960 Chevrolet Impala, which is exactly the right car. Not a flashy modern thing, not a truck, a big old American saloon that he has almost certainly owned for decades. In the episode IFT, Gus and Bolsa both address him as Don Salamanca rather than Don Hector. That's wrong. Within the world of the show, the title attaches to the given name, and everyone else uses it correctly throughout both series. Vince Gilligan has acknowledged it publicly as a mistake and said he'd go back and fix it if he could. I find that a genuinely charming thing for a showrunner to admit. 2 shows, over 100 episodes, and the continuity error that bothers him enough to mention is a form of address. Better Call Saul does a piece of visual foreshadowing with him that I didn't spot until it was pointed out to me. In several of his pre-stroke scenes, he's sitting on a park bench, and those benches are framed and shot in a way that echoes the wheelchair almost exactly. Same posture, same width, same arms. It's not subtle once you know, and it's completely invisible until you do. He speaks in exactly 2 Breaking Bad scenes, and both of them are flashbacks. Every single thing he does in the present-day timeline of that show across 3 seasons is done without a word. He was originally intended to be a much larger antagonist in Breaking Bad's 3rd season. That plan changed during development, and what survives in the finished version is a demanding old man in a chair insisting that Walter White has to die, which turned out to be considerably more effective than a bigger role would have been, and I say that as somebody who would happily have watched a whole season of it. Chronologically, within the combined timeline of both series, Hector Salamanca commits the first on-screen killing of anybody. Max Arcaniega, 1989. Almost everything else in this story happens after that gunshot, which is a very tidy piece of structure for something nobody planned, even though it's Gus Fring, not Hector, who shoots Max. The letterboard scene at the DEA office is worth one more mention purely on craft grounds. The writers had a character with no speech, no mobility, and no willingness to cooperate, and they still found a way to give him a punchline in a room full of federal agents. Whatever you think of the joke itself, solving that problem at all is impressive. The nurse in that scene, incidentally, is doing a lot of very good and completely unremarked work. She translates for him patiently, letter by letter, and delivers what he's spelling to a room of law enforcement in a flat, professional voice. Small part, perfect performance. And a final one, which is about the bell, but from the other direction. Because Hector's communication method is 1 ring for yes and 2 for no, every scene involving him is technically a scene where the other characters have to ask closed questions. Which means the writers had to construct entire conversations that work in binary. Once you notice that constraint, you can see them working around it constantly, and it makes those scenes considerably more impressive than they look. Anyway, that's most of what I wanted to get through tonight. Actually, no, there's one more place I want to spend some time. And it's a building, Casa Tranquila, the nursing home. It's where roughly 1/3 of this character's total screen time takes place, and I think it's one of the smartest settings either show ever committed to. Consider what it has to do. It has to be somewhere a cartel patriarch can plausibly be stored. It has to be accessible enough that his nephews can walk in whenever they like, and that a rival can drop in for a chat, and that a chemistry teacher can wander through and hold a private conversation about murder. And it has to feel completely ordinary while all of that is happening. So it's a slightly tired, mid-range care facility with pastel walls, a day room, a corridor with a handrail, and staff who are pleasant and busy and not paid enough. Exactly like every care home anybody has ever visited. And that's the trick. Everyone who comes through those doors is operating at the highest possible stakes, and the building simply does not care. There's a man in room, whatever it is, who used to have people killed for looking at him wrong, and to the staff, he's a resident who needs his fluids and doesn't much like the pudding. The birthday party scene is the clearest expression of it. Hector's parked in the middle of a small celebration for another resident, and the show just lets it play. Paper hats, a cake with candles. Singing that isn't very good because it never is, and a man in the middle of it who has spent his entire life ensuring that nobody would ever be able to put him anywhere. There's no music cue telling you how to feel about that. It's shot flat, like documentary footage of a real party. I've thought about why the Lalo visits work so well in that space, and I think it's because the nursing home is the one environment in the franchise where somebody being kind is not immediately suspicious. Everywhere else, kindness is leverage. In there, it's just what happens. So when Lalo pulls up a chair and starts talking about the old days, or tops up the fruit drink, the setting does half the work of making it land. Gus's visits work by the opposite mechanism. He arrives dressed like a man who's come to discuss a care plan. He sits in the visitor's chair and he keeps his voice at exactly the level you'd use in a shared room. The most sadistic conversations in the entire franchise are conducted at library volume because the building requires it. There's a good detail in the Breaking Bad stretch where the cousins visit, which is that they clearly do it regularly and clearly have a routine. They know where the board games are. They know how the board works. Nobody has to explain anything to anyone. Which quietly tells you that in between the scenes we see, 2 silent hitmen have been driving to a care home in New Mexico on a schedule to sit with their uncle. That's a whole relationship communicated through a cupboard. And then there's the practical question the show never quite answers, which I find enjoyable rather than annoying. Who is paying for Casa Tranquila? The organization, presumably, or the family. Somebody set up an account somewhere and it gets serviced. And this extremely dangerous old man's monthly fees are handled by whoever handles that. It's the least glamorous conceivable piece of cartel administration, and it must exist because he's been in there for years. The other residents deserve a word too. They're there in almost every scene, in the background, in chairs, watching television. Real extras, played straight, no comedy business. And the effect is that Hector is never once presented as unusual within that building. He's one of a dozen old people in a room, and the only thing that distinguishes him is that occasionally someone frightening comes to visit. Which is, when you think about it, the most complete humiliation the show could have devised. Not the chair, not the silence, the ordinariness. 20-odd years of being feared across 2 countries, and it ends in the second row of a day room during someone else's birthday. I've watched a lot of television about criminals, and very little of it has the nerve to do that. Most shows want the fall to be dramatic, a shootout, a betrayal, a body in a river. This one puts him in a comfortable chair with a blanket over his knees and lets him sit there for 4 years. I want to spend a bit of time on why this character functions as well as he does because I think it's less obvious than it looks. The easy answer is the performance and the bell, and those matter enormously. But there are plenty of memorable villains with a gimmick and a good actor, and most of them don't hold up across 2 shows in 13 years the way this one does. Here's what I think it actually is. Hector Salamanca is the only major character in either series who never lies to himself. Everybody else in this universe is running an internal story about who they are. Walt tells himself it's for the family right up until the moment he admits it wasn't. Jesse tells himself he's not that guy. Gus tells himself he's a businessman who was wronged. Jimmy tells himself he's about to start doing things properly. Mike tells himself there's a version of this where his hands stay clean. Nacho tells himself he can get out. Hector doesn't do any of that. He wants power, he wants respect, he wants his family on top, and he'll do absolutely anything to get it. And at no point does he construct a justification. When Bolsa tells him it isn't personal, he doesn't produce a business argument. He screams that it is personal because it is, and he's the only one in the room willing to say so. That's why he's oddly restful to watch, in a way that Walt isn't. There's no self-deception to keep track of. The second thing is the constraint, and this is the bit that's genuinely rare. Most television gives its scariest characters more capability over time. Bigger operations, more men, better weapons. This one systematically removes everything. First his mobility, then his speech, then his roots, his business, his men, then his family, one at a time, then his boss and his organization, then the last relative he had. And he remains frightening the entire way down, which shouldn't work. Menace is normally a function of what somebody can do to you. Hector's menace becomes a function of what he refuses to do, which is a much stranger and much more durable thing to build a character on. By the end, his entire arsenal consists of not looking at somebody. And the third thing is that he's the only character in either show who never gets a redemptive scene, and the writers never once flinch about it. We talked earlier about him being right and nobody listening, so I won't go over that ground again, but notice what the shows decline to do with him. There's no flashback where he's kind to somebody, no moment where you see the boy he used to be, no wife, no love story, no grief that isn't about ownership. Every other major figure in this universe gets softened somewhere. Gus gets the Lucuma tree, Mike gets his granddaughter, even Tuco gets a grandmother. Hector gets nothing, and he's still the character people quote and impersonate and put on shirts, which I think tells you something about how little sympathy actually has to do with whether a character works. And then there's the thing I noticed on my most recent watch, which is that this is fundamentally a story about being underestimated told 3 separate times. Walt and Jesse underestimate him in the shack and nearly die. The DEA underestimates him in an interview room and get nothing. And Gus, who understands him better than anybody alive, underestimates him in a nursing home at the last possible moment, because he spent so long thinking of Hector as a specimen he's keeping alive that he forgets there's a person in there who's still making decisions 3 times, same mistake, same result. If you want a single sentence for the whole character, I think that's it. Everybody in this universe looks at Hector Salamanca and sees furniture right up until the moment they don't. A scrapyard in the middle of the afternoon. One of Tuco's men makes a remark that could be read as a compliment or could be read as a joke at his boss's expense, and Tuco decides it's the second one and beats him to death in front of 2 witnesses over the course of about 90 seconds. Nobody planned that. Nothing was gained by it, and it happened because of how a man was raised. Tuco Salamanca is the first proper antagonist Breaking Bad ever has, and he is a catastrophe, not a strategic one, a personal one. He beats one of his own men to death in a scrapyard over a comment. He takes hostages on impulse. He's using his own product heavily, and it's visibly running him. Every single decision he makes across his time on the show makes his situation worse. And that man was the succession plan. That's never stated outright in any mediated meeting on the record in front of Gus and the twins. Don Hector saw Tuco as a son and groomed him to take his place in the organization. So let's take that seriously for a moment. A man with decades of experience, a genuine strategic mind, and a track record of correctly reading every threat the cartel ever faced, looked at the available candidates and chose the one who couldn't sit still. Why? I think the answer is in the water barrel, honestly. What Hector taught his nephews was that the correct response to disrespect is immediate and disproportionate violence, and that the wrong response is anything else. He taught that to 4 boys. 2 of them, the twins, absorbed it as discipline and became terrifyingly controlled. Lalo absorbed it as strategy and became the most dangerous of the lot. And Tuco absorbed it as instinct, which is the version that gets you killed in a desert shack. Hector wasn't picking the best operator, he was picking the one who most resembled him at that age, and he was doing it without noticing. There's a version of the story where somebody points that out to him. It doesn't happen, because nobody in his life is in a position to tell him anything. Joaquin is the other one worth mentioning, and it's remarkable how much weight that character carries given we actually do meet him on screen. He turns up as a name in a photograph, a grandson present at the party in Mexico when everything goes wrong. Jesse shoots him during the escape. And the only function that character serves in the entire series is to be the last one, so that Gus can walk into a nursing home and say that the name dies here, which is efficient writing, if a bit brutal on the character in question. What strikes me about the whole generational picture is how quickly it collapses. Hector spends what must be 40 years building a family into an institution. Tuco is dead within 2 seasons. The twins go a season after. Joaquin dies off screen in Mexico. Lalo, the one who was actually good at it, dies under a super lab in the dark. And Hector outlives every single one of them, in a chair, in a building where the staff call him by his first name. The whole point of family is that the family is supposed to be the thing that survives. That's the entire argument. And it's the only thing in his life that doesn't. One last craft thing, and then I'll let you go. Dave Porter scored both of these shows, and what he does with the Salamancas is worth a mention because it's unusual. Most television villains get a theme, something you can hum, a motif that returns so that when the character walks in, you know how to feel. Standard practice, and it works. The Salamancas mostly get texture instead. Low sustained tones, metallic scrapes, percussion that sounds like machinery rather than drums. It's less attuned than a change in the air pressure of a scene, which is exactly right for characters who don't announce themselves and who generally don't say much when they arrive. And then you got the bell sitting on top of all of it, which we've covered, so I won't go over it again. But I will point out the relationship between the two because I think it's deliberate. Everything underneath is dark and low and blurry. The bell is bright and high and absolutely precise. It cuts through because it's the only clean sound in the mix. There's also the silence, which is a genuine choice rather than an absence. Several of the biggest Hector scenes have no score at all. The DEA interview, large stretches of the final confrontation. When the music does drop out in these shows, it tends to mean somebody is paying very close attention, and Hector's scenes drop it more than most because he's a character you have to watch rather than listen to. The cousins get similar treatment, and the show pairs it with that yellow-brown color wash I mentioned earlier, so the whole sensory package changes when they turn up. And there's one more piece of sound design I've always liked, which is the wheelchair itself. It squeaks. Not comically, just slightly, the way real ones do. So in the quieter scenes, you get this small mechanical noise every time he's moved. And it constantly reminds you that this man is being transported rather than traveling. That's the kind of detail that nobody consciously notices and everybody feels. There's a related thing with the television set in the desert shack, which I only clocked recently. It's on for the whole sequence, playing something Spanish language and cheerful. And it never gets turned down or acknowledged. So the entire scene where two men discuss poisoning somebody happens over a soundtrack of daytime programming at a slightly irritating volume. That's a choice. A quieter room would have felt tense. A room with a telly on feels like an afternoon at a relative's house that you can't leave. The Los Pollos Hermanos scenes work on the same principle from the opposite direction. Pleasant lighting, a menu board, the ambient noise of a fast food restaurant at lunchtime, and a conversation about drug distribution conducted at conversational volume in the middle of it. Nobody in either show ever seems to move somewhere private when you'd expect them to. And then there are the Mexico scenes, which get the most unusual treatment of the lot. Cicadas, water, wind through dry grass, and long stretches with no score at all. Eladio's Hacienda is one of the most sonically relaxed environments in the entire franchise, which is a strange thing to say about the place where the worst decisions get made. But that's exactly the point. It sounds like a nice holiday somewhere hot, and it is, right up until it isn't. If you ever want to test how much of this is deliberate, watch a Hector scene with the picture off. Most television falls apart if you do that. These ones don't, particularly. You can follow the shape of a scene from the room tone, the wheel, and a small brass bell, which is more or less the whole philosophy of these two shows in one squeaky wheel. Here's a thing I tried recently and can recommend if you've got the time and a certain amount of patience. Watch his story in chronological order rather than broadcast order. It's a bit of a project because you're pulling scenes from two shows across 11 seasons and jumping about constantly. But the effect is genuinely different, and not in the way I expected. In broadcast order, Hector is a mystery that gets solved. You start with an unreadable old man in a chair and gradually receive the explanation, piece by piece, over about 13 years. Every prequel reveal recontextualizes something you'd already seen. That's the designed experience, and it's very satisfying. In chronological order, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a story about somebody slowly running out of room. You start in 1989 with a man at the height of his powers, standing beside a boss's swimming pool, doing whatever he likes. Then the mid-90s, and he's carrying gifts to a hacienda and being talked over. Then the 2000s, and he's fighting a retired police officer over $50,000 and losing. Then his routes go. Then his shop goes. Then he's shouting in a warehouse about how much his family sacrificed, and nobody in the room is listening. And then he's on the floor. And the second half is one continuous narrowing. A hospital bed, a therapy room, a care home, a day room, a bell. Watched that way, the ending isn't a triumph at all. It plays as the last available move by somebody who has been methodically stripped of every other option, which I suspect is closer to what was actually intended before anybody knew there'd be a prequel to build it out. A few other things change too. The Gus material becomes almost unbearable in sequence because you watch two men have roughly the same conversation for 22 years with the balance of power shifting a few degrees each time. Early on, Gus is on the tiles being held down. By the end, he's the one deciding whether the other man gets physiotherapy. Nothing about their relationship ever develops. It just rotates. The family losses land differently too, and it's a pacing thing rather than an emotional one. In broadcast order, they're spread across years of television, and you absorb them one at a time. In sequence, they arrive close together, and the gaps between them get shorter as they go. And the very last thing, which I didn't anticipate. In chronological order, the shack scene from Grilled arrives extremely late, and it plays completely differently. You know exactly who that man in the corner is. You know what he's already lost. And you're watching two strangers stand there and discuss murder in front of him because they've decided he isn't a person. First time round, that scene is a clever reveal. In order, it's a bit heartbreaking, which I did not expect to be saying about Hector Salamanca, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the fact that I am. So, that's him. I've been trying to work out how to end this for a while, and I keep coming back to something small. For a man defined by refusal, the story ends when he finally agrees. Everything he has in that last stretch is the ability to say no to the DEA over and over across 2 continents and 17 years in a stroke. No to Gus in a nursing home week after week about something as small as where he points his eyes. And the thing that finishes it isn't a no, it's a yes. He gives Gus exactly what he asked for, freely, and that's the end of both of them. I don't think that's a moral. I'm not sure this universe does morals. But it's a very neat piece of storytelling, and it was constructed backwards across 2 different shows by people who couldn't have known in 2009 where any of it was going to end up. The other thing I keep thinking about is how genuinely unlikely all of this was. Somebody wrote a small part for an old man in a wheelchair with no dialogue. Another actor read it and passed on it because there was nothing to say. And a character actor in his late 60s who'd spent 35 years doing off-Broadway and playing landlords and henchmen looked at the same pages and saw a whole person in there. And then built one mostly out of stillness based on somebody he'd actually visited in a care home in Florida. That's the bit I find quietly lovely about the whole thing. It's not a story about a cartel. It's a story about an actor being given almost nothing and deciding that was plenty. There's a lot more in this world I want to get to, and I've been making notes. Lalo deserves his own night properly, from the compound in Chihuahua right through to the Superlab, because there's a version of that man's story that nobody's told at length. Gus deserves one too, though I suspect that one's going to be longer than this. And I've got half an idea about doing the cousins on their own, which sounds thin until you start counting how many of the franchise's best sequences they're standing in the middle of. But that's for other evenings. Thanks for keeping me company with this one. Wherever you are, whatever time it's got to, I hope some of it was interesting, and I hope none of it kept you awake. Sleep well.